In the dense jungles of Vietnam, American soldiers whispered about a ghost, not a man, not a legend, but a woman. They feared her more than the darkness. She was invisible, unpredictable, and utterly lethal. Her name was Anh Hao, but they called her something else. The Tiger Lady. This is her story. The Vietnam War was brutal. It wasn't just a clash of armies, but a war of shadows, where the enemy didn't always wear a uniform. Guerrilla tactics turned every tree, every rice paddy, every villager into a possible threat. But among all the stories that emerged from this chaotic battlefield, one stood out. It wasn't about a general or a politician. It was about a woman, a fighter, a phantom. Her real name was Ngaln Nalik Ao, and while much about her remains lost in the fog of war, what is known paints the portrait of a woman who became a living nightmare for American and South Vietnamese troops. Anh Hao was born in 1932 in northern Vietnam, in a small rural village that saw war even before the Americans arrived. As a child, she witnessed the cruelty of the French colonial regime. Her father was executed as a suspected revolutionary. Her mother died of disease shortly after. Alone, orphaned, and angry, Anh Hao didn't just grow up, she transformed. At the age of 15, she joined the Viet Minh, the nationalist group resisting French control, and by the time the French withdrew in 1954, she wasn't a teenage girl anymore. She was a seasoned operative, cold, calculating, and committed to the cause. But that was only the beginning. In the 1960s, as American forces entered Vietnam, Anh Hao became part of the feared Nalik, Bulching, or Special Action Teams. Elite Viet Cong units, trained in sabotage, ambushes, and assassination, psychological warfare. She didn't just strike bases, she spread fear. US soldiers reported ambushes where not a single shot was fired, just traps, poisoned food supplies, or eerie broadcasts, played in the dead of night. Rumors of a woman leading these assaults began to spread, a woman who moved through the jungle like a ghost, who never left survivors, and who always took one thing from every attack, the unit's radio. Why? So she could listen, learn, speak. Troops began to hear a chilling voice, crackling through stolen radios at night, speaking English. "We're watching. We know your names. You will die far from home." The voice, it belonged to Anh Hao, and it earned her the name that would haunt the dreams of men long after the war. The Tiger Lady. American veterans would later describe entire platoons refusing to patrol at night. Some believed she was a myth, others were sure they'd seen her. A woman in black, sometimes barefoot, eyes cold as ice, quick, ruthless, gone in seconds. But she wasn't a myth. Her actions were recorded in US intelligence reports, though most have been heavily redacted. What is known is that she was linked to the 1967 ambush of Firebase Fuller, where over a dozen US soldiers were killed with no signs of a direct assault. The infiltration of an ARVN command post in 1969, which led to the poisoning of high-ranking officers, and the capture and presumed execution of a CIA field operative whose last known location was deep in Tiger Lady territory. She wasn't fighting for medals. She didn't seek fame. She fought to make the enemy afraid to sleep, and she succeeded. But the most chilling part of her story is still to come. In a war filled with chaos, she brought a different kind of terror, quiet, calculated, and cold. She didn't just kill, she studied, she stalked, and when she struck, it was surgical. By the late 1960s, Anh Hao had become more than just a field operative. She was a symbol. Within the Viet Cong Special Action Forces, she rose to a leadership position, commanding multiple assassination squads. Her operations followed what soldiers would later call the Code of the Phantom, a chilling blend of patience, intelligence gathering, and psychological torture. Her strategy wasn't just to eliminate military threats, it was to paralyze morale, to make soldiers question the loyalty of their allies, to turn the jungle, and even their own minds, against them. Anh Hao was a master of disguise. Fluent in French and English, she could infiltrate villages posing as a nurse, a teacher, or even a grieving mother. American forces later discovered that she'd once spent over 2 weeks inside a South Vietnamese medical outpost, pretending to be a civilian volunteer. What was she doing? Not healing the wounded, but mapping the outpost, listening to conversations, identifying routines. Days later, a coordinated Viet Cong strike hit that exact facility, neutralizing it with such precision. Some believed it had been an inside job. It had. Her job. Unlike many operatives, An Hao often left calling cards. At first, it was just silence. Radios dead, boots stolen, one bullet missing from each fallen soldier's clip. Then the notes came. We watched you. We learned. We waited. Even the CIA got involved. A secret report in 1970 described her as a high-priority elimination target, claiming she was connected to the deaths of over 57 intelligence officers, interpreters, and collaborators. Yet every mission to find her failed. Why? Because she was never in one place. She used the jungle like a second skin. Locals protected her, either out of loyalty or fear. One of her most infamous operations happened in 1971, in the Mekong Delta town of Mekong Tho. Under the cover of Tet festivities, An Hao and her team infiltrated a heavily guarded South Vietnamese police compound. They used disguises, fireworks, and sheer nerve. What followed was brutal. 4 high-ranking officers were executed in their sleep. The security system was completely bypassed, and the phrase "eyes in the dark, voice of the jungle" was found scrawled in red across a wall. No one ever heard them come. No alarms went off. No one saw them leave. This wasn't war, it was art. Terrifying, efficient art. She had rules, said one former Viet Cong operative decades later. Never kill, unless it will teach a lesson. Never strike, unless it makes them scared to strike back. And never be seen. American commanders began to treat her as more than a battlefield threat. She became a psychological one. Propaganda campaigns were launched. Rewards were offered, dead or alive. Troops were briefed on the Tiger Lady before missions in certain zones. She was given unofficial names in intelligence circles. The Black Widow of Ki Shi, Ghost Commander 13, and most famously, the most terrifying woman of the Vietnam War. But despite their efforts, An Hao was always a step ahead. Until one day, she vanished. For years the Tiger Lady haunted the battlefield. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she disappeared. No body, no capture, no trace. Some say she was killed. Others believe she simply chose to walk away. But before we close her file, there's one final chapter. One that raises even more questions than it answers. Opening scene. Mist over the jungle. Distant sounds of birds. Silence interrupted only by the sound of boots on wet leaves. War ends. Guns go quiet. Flags change. But legends, they linger. Sometime in early 1973, as the Paris Peace Accords brought a ceasefire to Vietnam, An Hao's name stopped appearing in Viet Cong reports. American intelligence files suddenly went cold. No new attacks, no new sightings. The Tiger Lady, who had orchestrated fear with surgical precision, had vanished. There were no confirmed kills, no verified photographs, no interrogated prisoners who could say where she went. Some whispered she had been assassinated by the CIA. Others believed she had died in a failed mission. But most of those who had served with her said otherwise. They said she walked away. After the war ended in 1975, Vietnam changed. Cities were renamed. The old enemies fled, or were re-educated. But one question still lingered. Where did she go? In 1982, a retired U.S. Marine claimed in a memoir that he saw a woman matching An Hao's description living in Laos, raising children in a quiet mountain village. No confirmation ever followed. In the early 2000s, a British journalist investigating war survivors in the Ki Shi region found several villagers who referred to a widow ghost, a woman who once taught them to fight, then disappeared into the hills after the war. They said she still left offerings at a hidden shrine. They claimed she was never seen in daylight. What remains certain is this: An Hao's impact on the Vietnam War was psychological, not just tactical. She exposed the limits of conventional warfare. She proved that fear, when used deliberately, can paralyze even the most powerful militaries. To the American troops, she was a shadowy assassin. To the Viet Cong, she was a legend of discipline and loyalty. To history, she remains a mystery. Even today, declassified U.S. military documents occasionally reference unidentified female operative, likely responsible for coordinated ambush. usually redacted and labeled Class B priority. Unresolved. In recent years, interest in her story has grown. Online forums, war historians, even podcasts have begun to re-examine the legend of the Tiger Lady. Vietnamese military museums quietly acknowledge women like An Hao, not by name, but in displays titled Shadow Units and Silent Weapons. And some say that in the hills north of Key Shilekals, still speak of her. She never stopped fighting, one old villager said. She just stopped needing a gun. There are many terrifying figures from the Vietnam War, generals, warlords, weapons that changed history, but none quite like her. She didn't fight with brute strength. She fought with silence, with strategy, with a cold understanding of what fear could do to the human mind. She is gone, but her story remains, stitched into the jungle, whispered in war stories, and remembered in the nightmares of those who walked into the dark and came back shaken. She was the phantom of Vietnam, the ghost who walked with purpose, the most terrifying woman of the Vietnam War.